It was just that explosive anger which would come out to the extreme.
Following years of brutal attacks, Katherine Knight committed a murder that's almost incomprehensible.
I didn't believe it. I was horrified.
She took a sort of malevolent pleasure in death.
In 2001, Katherine Knight was the first Australian woman to be jailed for the term of her natural life, never to be released.
I went out and cut his dog's throat.
Was the dog dead?
It was a clean cut, they said.
Tonight, clinical psychologist Dr. Leah Giarratano takes us inside the mind of Australia's most vicious female killer and explains why she comes from beyond the Darklands.
This is one of the most distressing and disturbing murders ever committed in this country. In fact, this horrendous slaughter is notorious around the world, not just for its gruesome brutality, but because it was committed by a rare creature, a female psychopath. To even try to make sense of how Katherine Knight could commit such a terrible act, we need to understand where she came from and where she was always destined to go.
This story takes place in New South Wales at the Upper Hunter Valley, in coal mining and cattle country. At the heart of the story is the Aberdeen Meat Works, the town's lifeblood for more than 100 years. In the 1940s, the manager of the abattoir was Jack Rowan. He was married to Barbara and they had 4 sons. It was a huge scandal when Barbara ran off with another abattoir worker, Ken Knight. Ken and Barbara had 4 more children, 2 boys and 2 girls. Among them was Katherine Mary Knight, born on the 24th of October 1955 at Tamworth Hospital, just half an hour after her twin sister Joy.
They were hard people. They were abattoir workers. They were itinerant. They moved around a lot. They grew up in abusive families, and they were abusive families. It was all they knew.
Katherine and Joy were toddlers when their mother's first husband died, leaving Barbara to raise 8 children.
Katherine moved through a lot of schools. She was very close to her sister Joy, but she didn't have a lot of close friends. And Katherine was not a confident girl and didn't make friends easily. She had a terrible temper, but she was also very shy.
Katherine craved her mother's love and affection, even though she claims Barbara frequently beat her.
When a child is brought up like that, a child turns out very damaged goods, as Katherine did, and a lot of her siblings did too.
Ken wasn't one to back down from hitting his wife or kids. But according to family, Barbara gave almost as good as she got.
Katherine and some of her partners alleged that her father was very violent towards her mother, that he demanded sex and he got it no matter what went on. Katherine was witness to this. It was never hidden. And Katherine also suggests that she was the victim of abuse at the hands of family members, sexual and physical abuse.
By age 3 or 4, something would already have died within Katherine. She knew no one was going to come to make things better, so she had to learn to fight or to hide. Obviously, very young children can't fight back, so when they're under severe threat, some will dissociate. This is more or less like a circuit tripping. Katherine was overwhelmed and she mentally disconnected. But while she was in that state, she was missing out on developing the range of emotions that make us human. Emotions like love, happiness, joy, and empathy.
Katherine grew up with a fear of rape and was forever claiming that men had abused her. At school, she was known for her sudden and violent temper.
I remember one of her classmates telling me that she saw Katherine turn on her sister Joy. It was an argument about whose turn it was to ride the bicycle home. Now, girls, sisters in that situation might pinch or pull hair or slap each other or shout and cry. They beat the crap out of each other with their fists.
At 15, Katherine left Muswellbrook High School. She could barely read or write and had no qualifications.
Her one great hope in life, her aspiration in life, was to work at the abattoir. She wanted to go where her brothers went, her father went, her mother had been, her grandfather had been. Everyone she knew and respected worked at the abattoir.
At 16, she landed her dream job. She began in the offal room and later became a boner.
They used to bone 600 a day and kill 600 a day at the end. But, yeah, it was just like everybody in Aberdeen used to work in the meatworks.
Katherine was in her element.
A lot of the women and a lot of the people used to come up out of the bone room, stand there and watch through their dinner hour, watch the people slaughter the cattle. It wasn't unusual.
The best part about the job was that she was given her own set of knives, blades that soon became her most prized possession.
There was something disturbing about the way Katherine loved to work. Other workers talk of her nicking arteries just to watch the carcasses bleed or the animals bleed. She took a sort of malevolent pleasure in death.
Katherine's pathological profile means she would also have had many fantasies about killing people. Fortunately for those around her, her bloodlust was partially satisfied at the abattoir. The abattoir was her killing field. Katherine got off on the screaming and the blood of the animals being put to death. She would also have loved the fear she instilled in others who watched her and saw that nothing could faze her.
When she wasn't at work, Katherine was hanging out with the new bloke in town, Dave Kallett, better known as Shorty Kallett.
She probably stood a head taller than him. I believe that David was Katherine's first sexual partner, and once they discovered sex, they fell for it in a big way. And this was the 70s. He was a wild drinking, wild living young man. And I think one day he woke up and realised that he'd proposed to her. The violence was announced on the wedding night when David woke up with Katherine attempting to choke him. She was furious that they hadn't had sex 5 times because Katherine had been told that her mum and dad had sex 5 times on their wedding night, and she figured that this was normal. David had expired after 2 attempts, and she tried to kill him.
David died of a heart attack in 2007, but his sister remembers the first time he took his 18-year-old bride home to Coffs Harbour to meet the family.
I think in the beginning they were madly in love. I thought they were totally opposite. You know, the tall redhead marries the little short, dark person. But then they say opposites attract.
Well, she was just a girl. Auburn, curly hair with glasses, much taller than David, and I hoped the best for them.
I went to live with her and David in Aberdeen for a few months, and of course I got to know her a lot better then. She was working at the abattoirs. She was lovely. She was very charming. We got on very well, actually. Most of the time that they were married, Kathy and I got on very, very well.
There was always something about the family that I wasn't sure of. I just felt there was a roughness around the edges.
But the most worrying thing about Katherine was her rapid mood changes.
She could be extremely happy. She'd walk around the house humming and singing, and then next minute she'd just fly into a rage. When Kathy was cranky, she got this strength about her. She became so strong that she could have picked David up and thrown him across the room.
Katherine had already begun threatening people with her treasured knives, which were never far from reach.
And that's what David always said to us. Once she gets cranky, just get out of the way, because if she picked up a knife or whatever, it was too late to get out of her way.
By her 20th birthday, Katherine was pregnant and highly suspicious of her husband, who had found himself a new girlfriend.
David wasn't the most loyal husband and admitted to me later that he had pretty poor morals at that period of his life. He was just a young bloke, and I suspect he wasn't always that comfortable at home anyway.
Katherine and David's baby, Melissa, was born on the 11th of May, 1976. 6 weeks later, Katherine tried to stab her husband with a broken beer bottle. Sick of his wife's psycho ways, Kallett ran away to Queensland with his new girlfriend, having no idea of the lengths his wife would go to to punish him for leaving her. In July 1976, 20-year-old Katherine Knight was furious. Her husband of 2 years had recently abandoned her, leaving Katherine with their 2-month-old baby. Katherine was obsessively jealous, and knowing David had run off with another woman sent her right over the edge.
Katherine was seen walking down the main street of Aberdeen, swinging the pram violently from one side to the other. She was dishevelled, she was wailing, she was a mad woman. And it looked like at one stage she was going to send the pram hurling into the traffic.
The police were called, and Katherine was admitted to St Elmo's Psychiatric Hospital in Tamworth. She was treated with antidepressants. She was back home after a couple of weeks, but there was still no sign of David, and her rage hadn't subsided. Unaware she was being watched by Lorna from the corner store, she placed 12-week-old Melissa on the railway tracks and walked away. The southbound train was due any minute.
Ted Abrahams found the baby on the track before the train came. I mean, it was a touch-and-go thing, I believe.
And then in the meantime, she left the line and went up to a house just up the road and raced into the backyard of it and grabbed the axe and was swinging it around in her head.
Katherine was taken back to the same psychiatric ward at St Elmo's Hospital, but checked herself out the same day. Less than 24 hours later, she snapped again.
She went around to a neighbour's house and knocked on the door and said, "My baby's ill, you need to drive me to the hospital."
The family agreed. Katherine went home, and the woman and her children drove to Katherine's place and found her very agitated.
And one of the daughters went in with Katherine to get Melissa out of the cot. Instead of getting Melissa out of the cot, Katherine produced a knife and began chasing this teenage girl out of the house. She slashed her face under the lemon tree. Then she took the family hostage and said that she wanted them to drive her to David Callett's mother's house.
She wanted to kill David's mother. She knew a surefire way to get a man's attention was to go after his mum.
Somehow the family convinced Katherine that they needed to stop at the service station and that one of the boys should be let go because he was asthmatic.
The boy alerted the police.
It took 2 policemen and the service station attendant to quieten Katherine down. She was swinging a big metal rod at the service station attendant, threatening to kill people. Again, she wasn't charged. Again, she was shipped off to a mental institution.
Katherine uses violence and fear to intimidate people into doing exactly as she wants. She's seen it done in her own family, and she's carrying on the tradition. But while Katherine's rage is at times spontaneous, at other times she's coldly calculating. You see, Katherine enjoys seeing people terrified of her unpredictability. She's amused by their fear.
In Queensland, things weren't working out for David and his now pregnant girlfriend.
When David heard what had happened with Katherine back in Aberdeen, he called his mother and they decided to go back and collect her from the psychiatric institution at Morisset.
Katherine was released into Florence's care. The following day, David drove his wife and mother to Aberdeen to pick up baby Melissa. This was only the second time Florence had met Katherine's mother, Barbara.
Kathy's mother came out to the car, proceeded to choke David through the window. I was petrified. David just held the steering wheel. Oh.
David's mother was sitting in the back of the car freaking out. She didn't know what to do. She'd never seen people behave like this in her life. She was a very nice woman.
Kathy came out, saw what her mother was doing, hit her with a fist across the head and knocked her mother down. That saved David's life.
Here was the father yelling, the mother unconscious in the dirt, the daughter with the grazed knuckles from what she'd just done. It was a circus.
A few weeks later, Katherine and David relocated to Woodridge in Queensland to make a fresh start. David got a job driving trucks, and Katherine began work at an abattoir near Brisbane. In October '76, David organised a surprise 21st party for his wife.
And she was just so thrilled that she couldn't stop kissing him all night because she was feeling like a princess for a night. That night she was so well behaved, and it was a good night. We all enjoyed ourselves.
It was in Queensland that Katherine's love of her work knives became obsessive. She started taking them everywhere she went. She even hung them above the bed when she slept.
And I said to Kathy, why do you have knives in the bed or hang them on the wall? She said, shrugged her shoulders and with a pout, you know, she was just childlike. They're there in case I need them. They were her pride and joy. I think she loved those as her knives as much as she loved David.
While staying with them at Woodridge, Sandy witnessed one vicious act she'll never forget.
There was one occasion that I heard one of her children crying very, very loudly in the bathroom, and I went in to see why there was so much crying in the bathroom, and she had the hot tap on and she was holding her daughter under the hot tap. I told David what I saw, and my brother said, promise me, Sandy, you won't say anything to Kathy tonight because she will kill you in your sleep, and she'll most likely kill me.
By 1979, the couple's marriage was in real trouble. David found Katherine in bed with another man. She begged him for one more chance. They moved to Landsborough, and Katherine convinced her husband to have another baby.
Kathy's moods became worse. She became more violent, and by then David was quite scared of being married to her.
David had every reason to be scared. He never knew what was going to set Katherine off and just how brutal she was going to be. The next attack would come when he was least expecting it and would almost kill him. It was 1979, and Katherine was pregnant with her second child. Her 6-year marriage to David wasn't going well. He was now very scared of his wife, never knowing when she would attack him. One night, he was late home from the pub because he'd made the finals of the darts competition.
She hated men being late. But David put it out of the back of his mind, played in the final, God knows if he won or lost, but he certainly lost when he got home, because he walked through the door and she caved in the back of his head with a skillet. She fractured his skull.
He staggered to a neighbour's place before collapsing.
I thought he was going to die. I thought she cut him in half on the head because there was just so much blood.
David spent the next week in hospital. Back home, he discovered what Katherine had been doing while he'd been playing darts.
She grabbed all his stuff and put it all in the bathtub and burnt his shoes, his belts, his socks, his shirts, his shorts. He only had the clothes he had on.
The police wanted to press very serious charges against her, but she was back to her sweetest and best and pleaded with him not to do it for the sake of their children, and he didn't press charges, but she very nearly killed him.
In March 1980, 24-year-old Katherine Knight gave birth to Natasha Callett at Nambour Hospital. Around this time, David was driving furniture trucks, which involved being away a lot. This led to more anxiety and more madness.
One night he woke up with her threatening to stab him. She said, "I know you truck drivers have women in every town. You've got one, haven't you? You've got one." Of course, he denied it. He probably did, but he denied it. This eventually put so much strain on their relationship that one day he came home and she'd gone. Out of the blue, everything was gone. And she went back home to Aberdeen.
It might look like Katherine has a terrible fear of abandonment, that she lashes out when she's frightened David will leave her. In fact, Katherine's anger is triggered when someone doesn't do exactly what she wants. She's not hopelessly in love with David and unable to live without him. She's already cheated on him once, and when it suited her, she left him.
When Katherine got back to Aberdeen with the 2 kids, she wasn't alone very long. She took up with a local bloke called Dave Saunders, who sort of fitted the bill with blokes that Katherine went out with. He was a hard-working, hard-drinking, hard-talking sort of man.
Saunders was a former speedway driver who was working at the coal mines when he met Katherine in 1986. He and his dingo pup soon moved from Scone to Aberdeen to live with Katherine and her daughters. But Saunders reckons the honeymoon period only lasted a couple of months.
One night, he opened the door of the house to be met by Katherine, who was in the middle of the ironing. She didn't put the iron down to greet him. She swung it and smashed him in the face with the iron. Apparently, they said you could see the steam marks on the side of his face for weeks later. But she wasn't finished. She had him by one arm and was swinging him around the front room of the house, attempting to cave his skull in with the iron. The only reason she was doing this is because he was late home. Why did Dave Saunders stay with Katherine Knight? Why did Dave Callett stay with Katherine Knight? Apparently she was fantastic in bed.
Things had gotten worse with Saunders. One particularly ugly fight began when he tried to leave her. The fight ended when Katherine ran outside. Saunders followed and saw she was nursing his dingo pup.
He realised she was holding a knife and she'd slit his dog's throat. It was dying in front of his eyes. She was that angry at him for leaving her that she killed his dog.
After she'd killed the dog, she turned up at her sister Joy's place with a shotgun, saying she'd killed Dave Saunders.
Katherine has 2 reasons for telling her sister Joy she's killed Dave. The first is for the shock and distress this will create. She finds this funny. The second reason is because she's actually planning his death. She's rehearsing the method of murder in her mind, and she's experiencing people's reaction to the news without going through with it.
After she killed the dog, Saunders tried to leave Katherine a few times. He moved in with mates, but she would never let him go. She was very persistent.
In June 1988, Katherine and Saunders had a baby daughter. Saunders bought an old weatherboard cottage at McQueen Street. When their baby was 6 months old, they moved in. But things hadn't improved, and Saunders kept trying to escape.
He took long service leave from the mine and told her he was going to visit a mate in another town. He wasn't going to another town, and he wasn't coming back either as far as he was concerned. He disappeared and he'd gone to Newcastle, and he hid in Newcastle, got another job.
The fiery redhead was furious that Saunders had managed to get away, and so she told their 2-year-old daughter her father was dead. While searching for Saunders, she stumbled upon her next prey. This relationship followed her usual pattern.
Pretty soon after they got together, she was pregnant. Pretty soon after that, their relationship turned violent. At one stage, she broke his glasses, she hit him. There are a lot of allegations that he hit her.
This hookup produced Katherine's first and only son. He was born in March 1991, just 11 months after they met.
Their relationship came to a sticky end. She left him with the kids. He felt the abandonment this time and tried to follow her about, but she'd already found a new bloke, and that bloke was John Price.
Unfortunately for John Price, no one could have foreseen the acts of untold horror that were awaiting him. Katherine Knight had 4 children to 3 former partners. All her exes claimed she used to beat them up. In October 1993, she met John Price. Both were 38 years old. Pricey had an ex-wife and 3 kids he adored. He was the one for Katherine, and she had no intention of letting him get away.
Pricey was another bloke who'd left school early, loved to drink, drove big trucks, worked at the mine. You know, he was your knockabout, ordinary Australian bloke.
Well, I only met him for a few moments, and I thought, what a lovely man. A real country, a lovely man. He shook my hand and I went, wow, you know, good manners too.
All 4 of her partners were very similar people, and there was rarely a night in their lives that they were sober, at least when they were with Katherine.
Initially, the relationship was good.
They got on quite well. Like, they could sit down and have conversation and have meals and, you know, I never really seen much arguing.
I actually didn't mind her. I knew she was different, and I knew she was good for Dad, but she wasn't good for Dad. She had a lot of good points and she had a lot of bad points, but the same with Dad. He had good points and he had bad points.
But some of Catherine's bad points were just downright strange.
She'd swerve to hit a dog, like a dog would run across the road and she'd swerve to hit it. I'd be like, Kath, what are you doing that for? She's like, oh, I don't like dogs.
The relationship followed the usual pattern.
This time she didn't get pregnant. She was getting older. But there was violence. She beat him. Perhaps he beat her. I don't know. She says that he did. His children say that there were scars on his body from where she'd stabbed him and hit him.
Pricey's nickname for Katherine was the Speckled Hen. After about 18 months, the Speckled Hen was pushing for a lifelong commitment. Pricey told her he was only in it for the sex, and she ought to get used to it.
She wanted Dad to marry her. She wanted Dad to marry her, and Dad wouldn't.
When Pricey wouldn't do what she wanted, she tried to hurt his children.
I was, 13-year-old girl, 14-year-old girl, and I'd just come home and she sat me down, like, really serious conversation to tell me that my father wasn't, you know, I wasn't my father's, that my mother had slept with some other bloke, and, you know, I didn't belong to my father.
Although they weren't officially living together, Katherine treated Pricey's place like it was her own. Pricey told friends he wanted her out of his house, but in Katherine's mind, the house was rightly hers. When she found Pricey's will and saw he'd left everything to his ex-wife and kids, she demanded $10,000 to leave. When Pricey refused to give her anything, she got a video camera and filmed the first aid kits he'd stolen from work.
Katherine said to me, oh, I got him good and proper now, and I said, what do you mean? And she said, I taped the stuff that he got from work he wasn't supposed to have, and she said, and I sent a video to his workplace and to the cops, and she said, that's fixed him, he's lost his job now. And I can remember thinking at the time, oh my God, how could you do that to anybody?
Pricey was 43 and unemployed. Katherine told her daughter Natasha that if Pricey took her back this time, it would be until death.
I don't know why I went back to her. Maybe he just felt that he needed somebody, I don't know.
Little did Pricey know that death would come sooner rather than later. Katherine Knight was furious when she videoed first aid kits her partner had stolen from work. She sent the videos to his boss and the police. John Price was sacked. No one could believe Pricey would take Katherine back after a stunt like that, but he did. With her two younger children now at school, Katherine was spending more time alone at home, watching her disturbing horror movies and enjoying the death that surrounded her.
One of her favourite places was a lounge room in her home. The lounge room was full of dead things. It was full of skulls and skins and horns.
She'd have machetes and all your old farm working stuff, like your little old push mowers and stuff. Well, they'd be all hanging off the roof. She'd have, like, animal heads, stuff like animal heads, just all creepy country type of stuff.
Katherine's been obsessed with death since she was as young as 4 or 5. She keeps the trophies of dead animals around her, partly because she finds death attractive, the way some of us would view art. But she also loves the way these corpses creep others out. They make people more scared of her. Katherine also watches sadistic movies as though they were pornography. These movies enrich her violent fantasy life.
It was late 1999, and 44-year-old Katherine was desperately trying to hold on to her man, while he was desperately trying to get away from her.
Deep down, I think that he knew it was going to happen. He knew. If it wasn't him, it was going to be somebody else.
The last few days of Pricey's life were building to a grisly climax. On the Sunday before his death, the couple had a massive fight, which resulted in a visit from the police. On Monday, Pricey went to work, and for the first time, he showed 2 colleagues where Katherine had previously stabbed him.
He went back to work on the Tuesday and said to his boss, I've got to go to the courthouse and the police station to see what they can do to keep this crazy bitch away from me.
The news wasn't good. Pricey was told he'd have to wait 3 weeks to go to court. He thought he'd probably be dead by then, but had no idea he was already halfway through the last day of his life. Workmates pleaded with him not to stay at home that night.
And he said, I've got to go home because if I don't, she's going to go after me or my kids and I'd sooner get me than my kids. And she did.
While Pricey was busy trying to get help, Katherine was playing out her fantasy. She bought a sexy black nightie and then went to Natasha's place to make a final family video. On the videos, she's kissing and hugging her children and making statements that could be perceived to be her last will and testament. Don't forget that old cane pram that my mum owned. I own. You own. She arrived at St Andrews Street around 11:30 p.m. Pricey was asleep. She watched some TV, had a shower, put on the new black nightie and went to bed. They had sex. And then she struck. Pricey's workmates were immediately worried when he didn't show up the next day.
John Price was a person who was always the first to arrive at work. That's why the concerns were raised very early by his workmates.
Apparently, they just kept ringing and ringing and ringing. And there was no answer. So they all pretty well knew.
Price had predicted his death. He'd run around town for days trying to get help from magistrates and police and neighbours. But nobody took him seriously enough, unfortunately.
Police were called, and a crowd of concerned locals gathered outside 84 St Andrews Street. When police forced their way into the house, they found Katherine Knight asleep on the bed. She had swallowed a number of pills and was out of it.
A good friend of mine, she said she was there the morning they brought her out. She said, Rosie, I don't care what anybody says. She walked out of that house as sane as you and I. She said the only one she looked at was my brother, and she said she just had a grin on her face, and my brother just dropped to his knees.
When Detective Sergeant Bob Wells arrived at the scene, Katherine Knight was being taken away in an ambulance.
I initially spoke with the duty officer at the time, who briefed me basically of what he'd witnessed inside the premises. I then went into the house, and it was just totally horrific, and it was a shock to everybody that had anything to do with that particular crime scene. I just couldn't believe that one human being, either male or female, of our species could carry out such a calculated offence or
Katherine Knight stabbed John Price 37 times before skinning, beheading and further mutilating his corpse. She then cooked parts of his body, including his head. She'd prepared 2 plates for his children. The meals consisted of human meat and vegetables.
There was a note beside each plate with writing on it with the names John and Beck.
She didn't leave me one. Apparently she'd actually put knives through their photos, left mine alone.
Yeah, she's left a couple of notes to my brother and myself. It was more or less along the lines of, if I can't have your father, nobody else will have him either.
It didn't take long for the unfathomable news to spread.
It came over the radio that a lady from Aberdeen had killed her husband, and I just looked at my husband and I said, you know, that would have to be my sister-in-law. It couldn't be anybody else. It would have to be Kathy. And my husband said, You know, Sandy, you've said a lot of things about her over the years, but I don't think she's that crazy. And then it came over the news only hours later that it was Kathy, and it was no surprise to me. It was no surprise to any of our family.
The police had the dreadful task of informing Pricey's family. They spoke to his son, Jonathan, but no one knew how to tell 14-year-old Rebecca. She read the horrendous details in a newspaper.
I just asked my mum if it was true. She said yes. I just laid on the floor for about 3 hours and couldn't move. I was just so sick. I was just so sick. Just wanted to vomit. I just, couldn't believe it.
For the next 6 days, Katherine was at Muswellbrook and Maitland hospitals. She claimed to have no knowledge of the monstrous crime she had committed. But two things would lead to her undoing: greed and the testimony from one of those closest to her. Katherine Knight stabbed her lover 37 times. She skinned, beheaded, and cooked parts of him. She then took some pills to make it look like she'd tried to take her own life. Detective Sergeant Bob Wells first interviewed Katherine at Maitland Hospital, just a few days after the murder.
You recall Pricey being in the bed?
I can't remember anything.
Do you recall yourself going to bed?
Faintly.
Although she claims to have no memory of the night of Pricey's death, she did remember stabbing him 6 months earlier.
Once Pricey got off the phone, he started on me, and I was around washing up, and it could have been a fork, a spoon, or anything in my hand. It was a knife that cut your meal with, and I aimed it at him, and it got him. He was leaning closer than what I thought, and my eyesight was bad at that time. I've only had new glasses since then.
You had this notion that Katherine Knight might have been the most evil woman to ever walk the planet. You didn't want to walk into the same room as her. You didn't want to set eyes on her. But what was most surprising was when you did see her, just how terribly ordinary she looked. She could have been a librarian. If you walked past her in the supermarket, you wouldn't have thought twice of it. She was a very ordinary-looking woman. They showed the video of the crime scene in court, and it's perhaps the most horrific video you would ever wish to see. It's just unimaginable what the police saw that day and what was recorded on that video. The skin looked like a wetsuit. It took you a while to work out what it was. It was hanging on a butcher's hook in the doorway. It had all come off in one piece. Probably the worst bit of the video was when they went to the stove in the kitchen and you see the gloved hand of a forensic policeman take the lid off the pot on the top of the stove, and inside it's Price's head staring back up at the camera.
That, to me, is Kathy showing her ultimate power.
I've suffered a nervous breakdown in relation to my involvement in this matter. I know that it had a huge impact on the officers that day. Although Katherine had displayed this bizarre behaviour, committed this absolutely shocking and horrific crime, that through the tests that those psychiatrists carried out, they believed that she was not suffering from any form of mental illness.
Further evidence to support she was of sound mind was discovered by John Price's solicitor, who noticed money had been withdrawn from Pricey's account the night he was killed.
Katherine had gone and driven some substantial distance to the township of Muswellbrook, where she withdrew $1,000 from John Price's bank account by way of using his key card. And then after all that, returning to the crime scene.
She was trying to plead insanity, and she told her brother that she's going to kill Pricey. She said, I'm going to kill him, and she said, I'm going to get away with it. She said, I'm going to do it in the way to make him think that I'm crazy. And her brother had actually made a statement against her about her saying that. She told him 3 weeks before she murdered Dad.
David rang me and he said, you know, she's finally done it. And I said, and how do you feel about that? He said, Sandy, I just cannot believe that it was not me.
On the 18th of October 2001, Katherine Knight pleaded guilty to murdering John Price. She was sentenced to life imprisonment.
I don't know, for some reason, I just can't seem to hate her. I can't feel the hate. But a lot of my friends have always said to me that's a good thing. That's a lot of my dad inside me, because Dad was how Dad was. He didn't hate anybody, and he used to say to me, babe, just be happy. Just be happy, just be happy.
I can remember asking her sister Joy, had she been to see Katherine, and I think at that point in time she'd been twice, but Katherine had said to her that she didn't want visitors and that she was happy where she was because she felt safe now.
I'd never been tempted to visit Katherine Knight in prison, no. I've spent most of my time through treatment trying to forget about the actions of Katherine Knight, basically.
With all of the partners that survived Katherine Knight, whenever I sat down to talk to them, here were tough men, you know, calloused hands, cigarettes, rough faces, rough talking. All three at one stage or another burst into tears as they described the violence they suffered at her hands. You know, they were genuine victims of domestic violence. No matter how hard their outer shell, they were rattled by what Katherine had done to them, and they remained rattled for decades later.
So could it be possible that Katherine Knight was sane when she committed this murder? How could someone in their right mind do something so completely deranged? Well, the fact is that Katherine was not insane when she butchered John Price. She planned what she was doing. She knew right from wrong, and there were no voices telling her to kill him. She was coldly lucid throughout the murder and dismemberment. And not only was she in her right mind, she was having one of the best times of her life. So if she's not mad, is Katherine just bad? Is she some kind of evil monster, completely alien to the rest of us? Katherine Knight's personality is best summed up in one word: psychopath. She's ruthless, self-serving, incapable of feeling guilt, and dangerous until the day she dies.
For the first time, the real story behind Australia's notorious Mr. Asia.
He was a vicious little bugger.
How he got beautiful young women under his spell.
He had something about him that people were attracted to.
The cops he had under his thumb.
Obey the New South Wales and the Queensland Police for a hamburger.
And why most